All right, episode 2 of the 303 podcast. I'm your currently sick host, Josh Espinoza. Fortunately, Dylan is not here today. I'm hoping to get him on within the next week or two, but he is not here today. So since this is my first solo podcast, I figured I'd do a little intro to me and then talk about what I want to talk about. So my inspiration to this podcast, I'm a big fan of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, like most people are who know about it. I'm a big fan of the Your Mom's House podcast with Christina Pazinski and Tom Segura. Big fan of The Fighter and the Kid, and of course the Weasel MMA podcast. Those are podcasts I watch a lot, spend a lot of time on. So definitely a big inspiration to starting this podcast. But I mainly want to talk about UFC or MMA in general, or combat sports on this podcast, and I figured I'd start with my background as a UFC fan. I'm 18 years old, but I've been a fan of the UFC for as long as I can remember. Even when I was little, I don't remember too much about the fights, but I remember names like Johnny Bones whenever we'd go watch it at my uncle's house, or Chuck Liddell and what's his name, Forrest Griffin and Rampage Jackson and names like that. And then it was really cool later on in life, after I'd stopped watching UFC, I rediscovered like John Jones, who in my opinion is the GOAT, and I watched fights like Jose Aldo versus Chad Mendes, and it really got me back into being a UFC fan, and that was about 3 years ago. But yeah, I kind of have a list here of things I want to talk about, MMA or UFC related, and my second one was favorite fighters in every division. Sorry, let me pull it up on my phone real quick. Every division, I'm going to go through what my favorite fighters are and a little bit of why. So, fighters. This UFC app is not that great. Rankings. Flyweight. It was obviously Demetrius Johnson, but he's no longer with the UFC. So I think now it would have to be the champ, Henry Cejudo. I think, even though it was a split decision, and I think Demetrius won, he deserves that win and that belt in a lot of people's eyes, so it's kind of hard not to like the guy. Bantamweight, TJ Dillashaw all the way. In my opinion, he will go down as one of the greatest fighters ever. I love watching him. He trains in Colorado. I'm from Colorado. It's just, there's no reason why I wouldn't like him, and he might be my favorite fighter in general. Featherweight, either my favorite fighters would either have to be Max Holloway or the champ Max Holloway, or Jose Aldo. Aldo was just so dominant and so fun to watch, and he's part of my favorite fight ever, which is Chad Mendes versus Jose Aldo 2. But I don't know, Max Holloway is just a monster these days. Watching him in that last fight against Brian Ortega, I don't think anyone's going to stop him in this division anytime soon, except for maybe Zabit Magomedsharipov. But other than that, Max is just looks like he's going to be dominant for a long time. Lightweight, not very popular opinion, but Kevin Lee is probably my favorite fighter. He's just I like his like drive, and you know, kind of how he conducts himself when he's not promoting fights. I like a lot about him, but his style is really good. I like his boxing. It's not the worst. It's not the best. It's serviceable. His kickboxing is pretty good now, and he's just an amazing wrestler. I mean, what he did to Edson was arguably more impressive than what Khabib did to Edson Barbosa. And I really think, even though he lost to Ally Quinta, he's so young, that I firmly believe he will be the UFC champion. I mean, with staph infection, he gave Tony Ferguson a pretty good run for his money at the start of that fight, so it's kind of hard to argue his potential. Welterweight, probably have to go with Robbie Lawler. Of course, his amazing fight with what was his name? Rory McDonald was, I mean, like, amazing. It was great. It's such a good fight to watch. A lot of people's favorite fight ever, and Robbie Lawler's just a fight of the night machine. He's just fun. He's fun to watch. Tyron Woodley can be boring. Colby Queefington's a bitch. Kamaru Usman's boring sometimes. Darren Till's really cool, but I don't know. He kind of just got starched by Woodley, just like Robbie did. So still have to give the edge to Robbie. Stephen Thompson's cool, but he doesn't fight too often. I don't think Dos Anjos belongs at welterweight. Just Robbie Lawler, I think, has the strongest case for my favorite welterweight, other than maybe Donald Cerrone, but he is moving down to fight Alexander the Great at lightweight. this coming month, I believe. Middleweight, Israel Adesanya. He just brings a lot of star power that the division has needed for a long time into the mix, and creativity and just dynamic striking that really has kind of been lacking in the division since Anderson's kind of been gone. It's just gone, other than Uriah Hall, but Uriah Hall has not really been able to climb up the rankings, and Israel Adesanya looks like he's making a run straight for the title. I think, in my opinion, he was the best thing to come out of the UFC in 2018. Light heavyweight, it's got to be John Jones. Controversial, a lot of people don't like him, but he's got to be the GOAT. I mean, he's so dominant. No one's come close to beating him, really, and I think it's hard to argue his talent when it's not coming from physical abilities and rather from fight IQ. And other than that, I mean, there's not really, the division's really dry. Gustafsson was really good, but obviously he's not the greatest as compared to John Jones or Daniel Cormier or even Anthony Rumble Johnson. Heavyweight, favorite heavyweight fighter is probably DC. I mean, he just proved that even though he left the division so that Kane could climb to the championship, he's still potentially the greatest heavyweight of all time. Undefeated. He beat who many people thought was the greatest of all time for the belt to be a champ, and then immediately defended against a guy that hits almost as hard as Francis Ngannou. So it's hard to argue his talent or his character. I mean, he's an amazing guy. He annoys me, but Daniel Cormier, I think, you have to be my favorite heavyweight fighter. Women's featherweight, I can't really say Chris Cyborg anymore. So I have to go with Amanda Nunes, who just was amazing in that fight. Just absolutely starched her. I don't think anyone saw that coming. Same thing with bantamweight. It's got to be Amanda Nunes again. Strawweight, Rose Namajunas, obviously trains up in 303 gym in Colorado Springs. Just that right there, hometown. I can't really say that she's not my favorite strawweight fighter. UFC 232, Jones versus Gustafsson and Nunes versus Cyborg. That was fucking amazing. That was potentially the best card of the year. It was just kind of unparalleled in its magnitude, other than McGregor versus Khabib, and it lived up to the hype. I mean, John Jones ended up being dominant, like a lot of people doubted he still could be, and Amanda Nunes cemented herself as the greatest fighter of all time in the women's divisions. You see like the fall of certain I don't know what to call them, pillars of the sport, like Carlos Condit. I think he should retire. He's just losing too much now. I don't think he's ever going to make a comeback. Ilir Latifi showed some massive holes in his game and kind of took himself out of the title picture with that performance for a while. And another pillar going down, Chad Mendes, one of the original featherweights, losing to arguably a better version of him, Alexander Volkanovski. So, and I mean, KO decision for the Anderson fight, which was kind of boring, but that's fine. Round 2 submission by Michael Chiesa, who looked good. Obviously, the starching of Chris Cyborg and John Jones running through Gustafsson. It was a solid main event. The prelims were pretty good, other than really that Andrei Arlovsky fight was pretty boring. But Kat Zingano getting the eye laceration was crazy. I don't know. That was just a crazy event to happen. I feel really bad for Kat. I mean, I've been to the Zingano's gyms in Colorado, in Brighton, and in I don't remember where the other one's at, but I've been there and I've seen them, and it just kind of sucks to see someone like that fall so harshly after starting from the loss to Ronda Rousey. But Megan Anderson, I thought looked healthy and good for how big she is, and looks like she might be a decent contender for Amanda Nunes later on. Peter Yan versus Douglas Silva was pretty good. Round 2, KO, TKO. That was pretty good. And BJ Penn, another pillar of the sport that fell in this card, and he should have been gone 5 fights ago. He didn't stand a chance. But Ryan Hall looked slick. Ryan Hall versus, I think, Brian Ortega would be amazing. Those guys' jiu-jitsu clashing would be really good. And imagine if Ryan Hall pulled off the upset and submitted Brian Ortega. That would change what everyone thought about the division. Nathaniel Wood versus Andre Ewell. I don't really remember it. I thought I remembered it being a pretty good fight, but it was just too early in the day. I don't really remember it. Uriah Hall versus Bevan Lewis. I definitely remember that one. Uriah Hall, from what I heard, was losing the majority of the fight, and I turned on the TV or my phone just in time to see him knock out Bevan Lewis. That was crazy, and it looks like Uriah Hall might be back, maybe bouncing back. Curtis Millender versus, I'm not gonna try and pronounce that name. It was like two ranked guys who aren't ranked fighting each other. That was really good, and Curtis Millender just continues to impress me so much. I think he's probably going to be doing something like Israel Adesanya has done in the middleweight division to the welterweight division and make his run for the title. And then Brian Kelleher versus Montel Jackson. Montel Jackson looked like a monster. Dropped Brian Kelleher right away and then submitted him. That was impressive, especially for being the first fight on the Fight Pass prelims. I mean, just the whole card up and down was solid. Definitely worth the $60. What do I think about Dillashaw calling out Holloway? I think that is maybe the dumbest decision TJ Dillashaw has ever made. But I'm not going to lie and say I wouldn't buy that fight if it was ever made. TJ Dillashaw is probably my favorite fighter, and I think he is arguably more skilled than Max Holloway, but there's a point where a fighter's physical advantages overtake any skill advantages, and I think that's what Holloway would have over Dillashaw. He's just too big. He's bigger than maybe all of the featherweights other than Zabit, and Dillashaw would be smaller than Chad Mendes or Volkanovski. It would be, I think, way too hard of a matchup, and he doesn't nearly have the wrestling of, or at least the strength to pull off the wrestling against Holloway like Chad or Volkanovski would. But I think it would be a much more interesting fight than people think with Dillashaw's just footwork and his speed, and he's really good with the kicks, just masking kicks, and Max Holloway tends to stand kind of planted if he wants to brawl. And I think Dillashaw could give him some issues in the first round and maybe a second round, but just by maybe attacking the legs and just keeping elusive with the footwork. But eventually Max's pace would just overtake Dillashaw. I don't think he would last more than 3 rounds with Holloway, but I mean, if he knows something we don't know, like Bang and him did versus Renan Barao, then far be it for me to tell him that he shouldn't go up and try and challenge for be the first person to be a three division champ. What I think about Cain Velasquez versus Francis Ngannou. I think that's a great fight. I don't know what to expect. I don't think anyone does. No one knows how Cain Velasquez is going to look. If he comes out like the Cain Velasquez of old, I think there's a fair chance he beats Francis. But I'm leaning towards Francis Ngannou very hard. I mean, he proved against Curtis Blades, who has a really good chin, that he just has to connect with you once. And with a guy as small as Cain, I doubt is as strong as Stipe Miocic, and Francis has probably pretty clearly been practicing his takedown defense. I mean, he just fought Curtis Blades. I imagine that was the majority of his camp. I feel like Cain is at a really large disadvantage here against Ngannou. Ngannou is just probably so much stronger and might be able to easily stuff takedowns for all we know. But I give edge to Ngannou, but if Cain comes back like the Cain of old, I give it like a 75% chance that Cain Velasquez wins that fight. Gustafsson at heavyweight. That sounds awesome. I really have wanted him to do that for like a year or about a year now. I thought about it and I was like, he's 6'5". He's a big guy, and he has crisper boxing than really anyone. I think his boxing is better than Stipe's. He'd probably be a little bit very similar style as Stipe's, and I think he might be a little bit better. He might have a little bit better takedown defense, a little bit better boxing, and maybe even better takedowns. I mean, he was able to take down John Jones and Daniel Cormier when no one else really has ever done that. And I don't know. I feel like Gustafsson would kind of tear through the heavyweight division. Let me pull it up real quick. Heavyweight. I still think he would lose to Daniel Cormier at heavyweight. I think he would probably beat Stipe Miocic. I think it would be an amazing fight. Really intense, a lot of knockdowns, a lot of really good boxing, and probably clinch work by Stipe. Stipe would probably be trying to force Gustafsson, who'd probably be the bigger man, up against the cage, and probably trying to take him down. Gustafsson would definitely beat Derek Lewis, I think. He's kind of similar to Volkov, but just I think a little bit better, a little bit shorter, but I think he's quick enough to make up for the slight difference in reach, and I think he has much more finishing instincts than Volkov does. I think he'd knock out Derek Lewis in the first or second rounds. Gustafsson versus Ngannou. I have to give the edge to Ngannou. I mean, Gustafsson is really good, but he does get caught, and Francis Ngannou he just has to connect once. I mean, he lawn chaired Curtis Blades with just one hit, and I mean, he's terrifying. Volkov versus Gustafsson would be pretty interesting. It would be kind of similar to John versus Gustafsson the first time, I think, with Gustafsson for the first time fighting someone taller than him and longer than him, and with a very similar style to him, but arguably better kicks, but lesser boxing. I think Gustafsson would probably take it, though, by like a decision maybe. Overeem currently versus Gustafsson. Gustafsson knocks him out in the first round. There's just Overeem's defense isn't as good as it should be. He runs too much, and I think Gustafsson's too fast and his boxing's too clean. He'd land on Overeem, and Overeem's chin is just not there anymore. Junior Dos Santos, he's clearly showing that power's the last thing to go, but he did not look good at all against his last fight versus Tai Tuivasa, so I would have to give the edge to Gustafsson there as well. Alexei Olenek versus Gustafsson, I'd have to give the edge to Alexei. Alexei's old, but I really feel like he's a sleeper for the title in this division. I mean, he grabs you and it's over. I don't care who you are, unless you're maybe Fabricio Verdum. When Alexei grabs you, you're going out. You're getting choked out. Justin Willis, I think he's not a very good fighter. I watched his last 2 fights, and I was not impressed at all. I think Gustafsson would run through him. Same thing with Marcin Tybura. Gustafsson would definitely beat Tai Tuivasa. It'd be a good fight, though. I don't know too much about Shamil, so I'm not really going to say anything about him. Arlovsky's looked pretty bad. I think Gustafsson would beat him. Stefan Struve, I think it'd be kind of similar to the Volkov fight, except Volkov is better than Struve, so I still give edge to Gustafsson, even with the increased reach and height. Blagoy Ivanov, I didn't really like his last performance. I think Gustafsson takes him as well. I think Gustafsson pretty much would be a top 3 heavyweight and might even beat someone like John Jones at heavyweight if his boxing stays that fast and his power increases. I think there's a good chance he beats everyone but Daniel Cormier, because Daniel Cormier has just almost like a pressuring defensive style, and it's pretty clearly been able to shut down Gustafsson in the past. What other notes do I have? Not a whole lot. There's some other stuff that I would like to talk about on this podcast. I'm a big fan of comics and movies. I just recently saw Aquaman. I thought it was great. I thought it was a great change to the DC universe and how their movies have been going. I think Wonder Woman and Aquaman might have even saved the DC movies, because just Justice League and Batman vs. Superman they're terrible movies. They're so bad. I watch a lot of anime. It's kind of nerdy, but it's not as bad as people think it is. My favorite anime is probably My Hero Academia. It's a little newer. It's currently on season 3. Season 3 is finished. We're waiting on season 4. I think it's going to be the next big thing, like Naruto is, but bigger and more pop culture. It was probably the first anime to ever correctly pull off superheroes, I think. Very similar to how American comic books do, but I mean arguably a little better with the serious anime flair on it and storytelling flair on it. With video games I play, I'm a big gamer. The last podcast, the first 303 podcast, was mainly all about video games, which will mainly be what it's about when Dylan's here with me. But what video games I play, I'm a big fan of Call of Duty. I've played Call of Duty a long time. It was the first game I really ever played, and I still play it. I like Black Ops 4. I don't like where the microtransactions are going, but it's in terms of gameplay, it's pretty solid. What other games do I play? I'm a big fan of the UFC game, obviously. I'm really good at the stand and bang mode, but in a normal mode, any wrestling at that game at all, you will destroy me. I'm so bad at it. What else? Rocket League. I'm a big fan of Rocket League. I played it when it first came out on PlayStation, and I deleted it for a couple years, like I think a year and a half, 2 years. And I recently downloaded it again and started getting into competitive and watching the YouTube videos and tutorials, and oh my god, I love it. I think the esports scene is great, the community is great. The amount of nuance you need to be good at the game, I think, is fair. A lot of people think it's like a arcadey game or like a sit down and play it with your friends on the couch game, but it's not. It's actually a very competitive online game. I'd argue just as competitive as anything like Call of Duty or Fortnite or any of those. Other games do I play? I used to play Destiny a lot. I want to save most of my opinions on Destiny for a separate podcast with Dylan. We've played Destiny for a very long time. I've been playing it since its release. I was too young and didn't really game enough back then to know that it was terrible. I took a break until The Taken King came out, and like 3 months after The Taken King came out is when I got it, and I was hooked. That DLC was so good, and I played it all the way until the end of its cycle, and at the end of the cycle, I had convinced 3 of my friends to get PlayStations and Destiny just so we could play Destiny as a squad, and that was really cool. And then I ended up working with Dylan's parents and his family at their restaurant, and some of the other coworkers that were there around our age played Destiny as well, so that's how we got into like raiding and stuff like that. And some of my best memories in gaming ever come from the Destiny 1 raids and trials with my friends, even though we never won because we were pretty bad. Well, they were pretty bad. I was pretty good, but they don't even know that. And just how cool the guns were. Like Thorn at the end of it was a good balanced exotic. The Last Word was super fun. The Vex Mythoclast was amazing, and I remember the feeling when I got that, and that gun was just amazing to me. I was so happy I got that. After my first try on the Vault of Glass 2, because I missed it in year 1, I never got that gun. And as a huge Destiny fan, I was really bummed out about that. But when I got it, when they revamped the raids, I think in the April update, it was really awesome. It was a really awesome feeling. Not really one that I've ever had in any other game, probably. And then Destiny 2 came out, and Destiny 2 looked really promising at first, but it was just... it was almost like a facade, almost like Black Ops 4, where the game at base value is pretty good, but as soon as you get into the extended period of time that you need to play the game, like after you've beaten the story, or like in Call of Duty, like after you already played for a couple weeks and stuff like that, they just fall short. These games just fall short. Destiny's just content wasn't good, its endgame wasn't good. They made that ridiculous call to get rid of random rolls, which was baffling, because that was the whole driving force behind the community of Destiny, was loot and grinding for god rolled loot. And then Forsaken looked like it was going to be good, and it was pretty good at first. I thought Gambit was an amazing game mode. It was really fun. It had me hooked for a couple weeks, but I don't know, it was just too little too late. It was a really good expansion, but the quality that game that it was at after Forsaken released, it had just gotten back to the quality that it had been when I had quit Destiny 1 to wait for Destiny 2. And that's kind of inexcusable to regress that far in your sequel. And at the end of its first year of it being a live game, it's only then getting back to that quality. I don't think I'll ever play Destiny again. Maybe I'll see if they make a third one and if it's any good. But other than that, I just keep up with the lore and the story because it's amazing. But I think Destiny has fallen pretty hard and on some really hard times, especially Bungie. We kind of talked about that in yesterday's podcast, how far Bungie's kind of fallen and how little they listen to their community, or fake listen to their community a lot. But yeah, so that's kind of what I want to talk about on this podcast for the most part. Is when by myself, I'll most likely talk about UFC, and whenever those topics are done, if there's still time left on the 30-minute runtime, then I'll talk about other things like gaming or anime or whatever interests me. I'm also thinking about doing 5-minute shorts on topics that don't make it into the 30 minutes and posting those. Podcasts obviously do not have to be a full 30 minutes, but it sounds good. 303, Denver area code. I don't know. But close to 30 minutes every podcast you can count on. This is my first podcast, so sorry if it was a little awkward or by myself anyway. I feel like yesterday's with Dylan was pretty good. But yeah, 30 minutes 3 times a week. That's what we're doing here, the 303 podcast. And thank you for watching.